You made a mess of that sensor field. Another group of settlers got wiped out by the marauders.
A recent study shows that production on Mars is unable to keep pace with
the EDF just levied more sanctions.
Researchers are looking for new and better ways to improve worker efficiency in all sectors of the Mars economy. Workers spotted a marauder raiding party in the Badlands recently. Two low-hull technicians were reported missing after the sighting occurred. Authorities have suspended the Mars Human Rights Convention in the aftermath of insurgent attacks on EDF facilities. Residents are advised to cooperate with EDF searches and seizures.
When the high-tech stuff fails you, it's time to get back to basics.
I'm dead.
When the high-tech stuff fails you, it's...
Those buildings over there are housing for EDF officers. They're the ones who call the shots.
Yay, I did it. Tomoyo Tatsuki. Oh, whoa, what's this? This is Red Faction Geurilla. So this is a game that has, like, a big emphasis on destroying buildings. SVN Sigmas, thank you for the follow.
There's a courier transporting data on EDF corporate dealings. We want it.
Found the courier. good driver. I couldn't keep up.
Oh, we're getting in the big rig now.
Time to bring some drugs! This is gonna be a nightmare.
I feel better now.
All hostile at the doctor. Have a nice day.
Some refinery workers have been arrested for shipping raw materials to the Red Faction. They're in the EDF office park. Can you help?
Citing a sharp increase in both the frequency of marauder attacks and the size of the remaining cargo.
It's all right. I'm here. Just give me a second to untie you.
I need to get to a safe house. Can you help?
Search the area! required to head indoors at this time.
Well, we failed that obviously because the AI shit the bed.
Some refinery workers have been arrested for shipping raw materials to the Red Faction. They're in the EDF office. Can you...
You okay? I'm here to help you. Give me a second, I'll have you out of here.
Any place safe nearby?
They're clamping down on people with demo licenses.
Come on, let's go! Hey, get me out of here! You just shot me! What are you waiting for? Let's go! I can't believe they did that!
Stop the vehicle and surrender your weapons.
Go! Hurry!
Can these guys seriously not get in a vehicle? Holy fuck!
Thank God you're here. The EDF are holding two refinery workers in the office.
the way they were.
I forget sometimes with these old games how bad some of these characters are.
Some refinery workers have been arrested for shipping raw materials to the Red Faction.
It is your duty as a citizen of Mars to report any illegal activity.
Are you gonna sit there all day?
Haven't heard from He terminado de usarlo, cógelo.
I cannot do this mission. I suck.
Some refinery workers have been arrested for shipping raw materials to the Red Faction. They're in the
Hey, you alright? I'm gonna untie you, and we're getting out of here.
¡Ayuda aquí dentro!
Can anyone hear me?
¿Puedes sacarme de aquí? We got... Those drones won't stand a chance. God, I've almost forgotten what freedom feels like.
The employee was last seen leaving the area with a suspected insurgent.
It's a guerrilla raid!
Roll it out!
We there yet?
Just stay calm.
Network connections are to be inspected on a weekly basis.
Get ready, EDF rolling in! Damn, you're good!
Security
Carmen, I don't know how she keeps going.
You can help out. Glad I could help.
It's hidden in the code. You just gotta find it.
I hope everything is as easy as Parker.
According to scientists at Holyoke, terraforming has become
I hit the E button to get off the turret!
Every time I think we're making progress, more EDF show up.
Parker may be free, but it's still a dump. The time for passive resistance is
Although
over.
Red Faction activity is partly to blame, an increase in missing Twitch has led EDF are largely responsible. Marauders are most active during the evening hours. Residents are advised to restrict nighttime travel. An employee of the EDF office park is reported missing. The employee was last seen leaving the area with a suspected insurgent. A worker at the chemical depot was reported missing this morning after failing to return home. EDF officials suspect the armed
Sam, I found one of those vehicles you were looking for.
Well done. Bring it to this safe house.
Sam, I found one of those vehicles you were looking for.
Well done. Bring it to this safe house. Much trouble, was it?
The ADF are...
In Earth news, third straight day of peace across the globe.
Oh, hi, Watching Lizard.
Oh, you don't... Those drones can't hide from you now.
You got any spare salvage? No price is too high for freedom. Don't let your brother...
Yay, a mic, ooh woo.
Mason, the drones built another watchtower inside the Tharsis Point wind farm. The security detail looks weak. Think you could help us tear it down?
There's no
and fortified the Dust Town Hall. Someone needs to level that place. Before you start this mission.
Red Faction insurgents demolished a guard tower in the depth sector.
Nice drive,
The
down
collapse
there.
caused damage to nearby wind turbines.
Are using standard couriers to transport sensitive information. Let's make sure that info doesn't get delivered.
This must be the courier.
I think I blew up a barrel. Oops. Uh-oh, Spaghetti-O.
For once, I'm proud to be a Martian.
Tip that someone's moving classified EDF documents nearby. Find the courier and get that info.
Let's go, Jenkins. Don't leave me standing here.
Yeah, I'm coming. Just had to take a leak.
Let's go!
Check out the new suspension.
Ihr sollt euch doch nicht gegenseitig abknallen!
Take cover!
Hey, Mason, I got big plans for Boston. We're taking a clean break. not made on Mars, it's got to go. Clean and righteous. Surrender is your only option. Oh, it's just too beautiful for words. Yeah! More! I love that sound. Terraform this, you bastards! Yeah, that's Mars talk, Mason, right there. It means I am clean and righteous. Hey, Mason, my name is Jenkins. The commander said I should come and find you. I need a gunner for my rig. Check your map. Meet me over there if you can help.
Mason here. I'm ready when you are.
Yeah, hold on. I'll be right there. Damn, they beat the crap out of you.
I had to step away for a second.
Hey, Mason, my name is Jenkins. The commander said I should come and find you. I need a gunner for my rig. Check your map. Meet me over there if you can help.
I'm at the coordinates. Where the hell are you?
Be patient. I'm almost there.
We're in this together!
Come on, Mason. Time to waste them. Hey, Mason. I got big plans be stopped by any means necessary. Yeah, come on, make it loud. Let it fire and shoot. That rattles their day. I'm not so sure I can fix that. You have no choice but to destroy your vehicle. That is beautiful! Wish I had my camera. I missed that one. Do it again! Everything from Earth has got to go. Corporations, religions, government, even your favorite toothpaste. If it's not made on Mars, it's got to go. Give them hell, Mason! Oh, yeah! Yeah! Ooh, nice one! Good shooting! That made him mad! Running from the EDF is a serious offense. Damn, I just fixed that! That one's ready. That blows up real loud. Hell, even late. Violation of English is dead, German, French, good riddance. Spanish, Pig Latin, adios, baby! Yeah, we're gonna make a Mars language with brand new Mars words. That's Mars talk facing right there. It means I am clean and righteous. Clean and righteous. Oh, it's just too beautiful for words. Yeah! More, more, more!
Ha ha ha, Cart goes, Yes, Cart does go,
Later, Mason! Thanks for the help.
Actually, I think I'm gonna take a little break from this game. We'll, watch something. I gotta make some food, so... Yeah, I need something I can be away for a second, so...
The
The
Omnibus
EDF can't
traction
stop us if we
refinery.
stick together.
Oh shoot, did I save? I hope it auto-saved. I'm praying for auto-save now. Yikes! That'll suck.
Basically, that means this is me. This is
What do James Bond and Pearl Harbor have in common? Duško Popov, the Playboy spy master with a lot of fingers in a lot of pies. Welcome to another World War II in real-time biography special, where I take a closer look at the major or interesting figures of the war. I'm Indy Nidell. Dušan Duško Popov is born July 10, 1912, in Titel in the Austro-Hungarian Empire to a very wealthy Serbian family with interests in banking, industry, and real estate. Despite the huge changes of the time, the Great War, the founding of Yugoslavia, things like that, Duško and his two brothers grow up in comfort and luxury. They spend a lot of their time sailing on the Adriatic, riding horses, and playing water polo and tennis. At 16, he goes to school in England and France. He then studies back at the University of Belgrade. By 1934, he is studying for a doctorate of law at the University of Freiburg in Germany. He has little time for the Nazis, who by now run Germany. In fact, he doesn't really take them seriously at all at this point. One of his friends is Johan Johnny Jebsen, the orphan son of a Hamburg ship owner. He will recall later that we both had some intellectual pretensions, but on the side, we were addicted to sports cars and sporting girls and had enough money to keep them both running. But their relationship is about to get a lot more serious. See, the two regularly attend debates at the Foreign Students Club. Though not really political, Popov gives some pro-democracy speeches there, which catch the attention of the Gestapo. Shortly after he graduates in 1937, he is arrested and accused of being a communist. After being questioned over 8 days and nights, the Gestapo transfers him to Freiburg prison, likely to await transfer to a concentration camp. Luckily for him, his friend comes to his rescue. Johnny drives to Switzerland and telephones Duško's father about what has happened. Having considerable political influence, the father asks the Yugoslav government for help. The government contacts Hermann Goering, who arranges Popov's immediate release on condition he leave Germany within 24 hours. He does, and returns to Belgrade and begins practicing law. In February 1940, after the war has begun, Johnny calls in the favor. He is now apparently in the shipping business and needs Duško's help in securing a Yugoslav license to get some German ships out of Trieste and safely past the Allied blockade. Duško helps out his old friend, and the two manage to eventually get the boats out of port. But Johnny then reveals he has joined the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence. Though he is opposed to Nazism, he does feel loyalty to Germany. Plus, it also means he can maintain his high-flying life as a playboy businessman. He asks for Duško's help one more time in drawing up a list of potential French collaborators for when Germany hopefully occupies France. Popov agrees, and within a few weeks produces the information and a report for the Abwehr. However, Duško Popov has made a duplicate copy that he also hands over to the British Embassy in Belgrade. The first secretary is delighted and tells him to keep in touch with the Abwehr. Well, luckily for Popov, that summer Johnny returns again, bringing with him his superior, Major Munziger. The Major thanks Popov for his work and asks him for more help. The Germans need a man who can roll with the upper echelons of British society. Popov seems to be just the man.
If it's
Major
a real
gives him a few days to decide, and Popov goes straight to the British. He talks with the MI6 chief of the Balkans, who wants him as a double agent. Popov accepts and goes back to Major Munziger to offer his service as a German spy. The Major gives him an exhaustive questionnaire that seeks information on the defenses of the English coast, the location of military sites, who Winston Churchill's enemies are, and all that stuff. Did Johnny always know his old friend Duško would betray the Germans? Well, we don't know for sure, but it seems that just before Popov leaves for London, Johnny tells him that he can get him some more information on Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain. So by this point, he is obviously ready to also double-cross his Abwehr spy masters. But being anti-Nazi, it's likely that Johnny contacted Popov in the first place because he knew he would be a double agent. Anyway, Duško Popov, German codename Ivan, leaves for London in December, traveling via Lisbon to meet his Abwehr spymaster Major Ludovico von Karsthoff. Upon arriving in Britain, he is given the British codename Scoot and goes to establish his cover as an agent for Yugoslav merchants wanting to import British goods. He sets up shop near Piccadilly Circus with the business name Tar Lair Limited Export-Import, a joking nod to his handler, Colonel T.A. Robertson. Popov begins feeding Karsthoff just enough information to keep him interested. That which is true, which does no harm. There's some misleading half-truths, and there are lies which the Germans have no way to cross-reference. With his cover as an international businessman, Popov can fly back and forth to Lisbon. Karsthoff asks if he can recruit any more agents in Britain, so he gets Friedel Gärtner and Dick Metcalf. Friedel is an Austrian woman with whom Popov is having an affair, and Dick is a fellow playboy. Renamed Tricycle by the British, Popov is now in charge of 2 double agents, and he expands his campaign of hoodwinking the Germans. One particularly brilliant scheme is codenamed Midas. The Germans are having a problem paying their agents in Britain. Popov and Robertson realize they can set up a middleman who will pass the money on. But through a complicated arrangement of money laundering, it essentially means that the Abwehr are directly funding MI5's double agent system. Better yet, the Germans pay Popov a 10% commission on the transactions. His reputation as a master spy, both in the Abwehr and British intelligence, is growing. Unfortunately, with the invasion and occupation of Yugoslavia in April 1941, his cover as a businessman is now useless. The Germans hope, though, that he can get a position as a Yugoslav delegate to the United States to build a spy ring there. The British approve the mission. He will remain under their control, but be on loan to the FBI. Duško and Johnny want to see each other one last time and arrange to meet in Lisbon. Popov arrives in June, and it is there that he meets naval intelligence officer and future novelist Ian Fleming. Fleming is apparently very impressed with the double agent and will base some of his later James Bond novels around Popov's life. In fact, Fleming's inspiration for his first Bond story, Casino Royale, reportedly comes from him witnessing Popov place an extravagant bet at a Lisbon casino to defeat an old rival. Funnily enough, Popov will always be somewhat insulted by all this, saying later that he doubts Bond would have survived more than 48 hours in the real world. But this isn't the most interesting meeting Popov has in Lisbon. First, he meets with Johnny, who says he has just been in Italy for the Japanese, gathering information about the recent British surprise attack on the Italian fleet at Taranto, which we saw in our regular episodes. Then Popov has a final meeting with Karsthoff, who gives him his mission. He is to go to Oahu, Hawaii, and gather information about military facilities there, in particular the naval base at Pearl Harbor. So while Johnny is gathering information for the Japanese about maybe launching a game-changing naval raid, Popov is to investigate U.S. naval defenses in the Pacific. I'll let you put two and two together about what that signifies. Upon arrival in New York in August, Popov tells the FBI everything he has learned so far, including the Japanese interest in Taranto and Pearl Harbor. The FBI write a report, but never share the information. In fact, Dusko Popov does not do well in America. The FBI strongly distrusts him, and their director, J. Edgar Hoover, apparently personally berates him for his womanizing lifestyle. But this is not the end of his career. He's got a few more tricks up his sleeve, some of which may change the course of the entire war, though each time he fools the Germans, he risks torture and death for not only himself, but also his family. I'll leave you with the words of one of his biographers, Larry Loftus, to explain how he does it. Like none other, Dusko Popov was born for the role. With equal measure, he could be and did wear all masks, villain and hero, killer and lover, deceiver and patriot, but above all, he was a showman. If you'd like to learn about another side of the intelligence war, you can watch a special we did on Bletchley Park and Enigma right here. While Popov might be financed by the Abwehr, we rely solely on the support of the Time Ghost Army. That is what keeps this show running. So please join us at patreon.com.
Just before we get started with this video, I want to say that it's brought to you by another channel that I run called Geographics. Each video covers one of the most interesting places in the world from history as well as the present day. We cover everything from the pyramids to North Korea's Hotel of Doom. If you like educational content and, well, hey, you're watching this video, so you probably do, you'll like Geographics. Videos run about 20 minutes, take a real deep dive into each location, so check it out. There is a link below, and let's get into the video. In the past, we've taken a look at some of the most horrifying discoveries ever made by archaeologists, but now we examine the opposite side of that same coin. These next finds were either fraudulent or simply wrong, and they caused quite a bit of embarrassment, leaving people who supposedly knew what they were doing with a bit of egg on their face. Let's do it. Number 10. The Runamo Runes. As far back as the 12th century, there were mentions from Scandinavian scholars about Runamo, a dike in Sweden which was said to contain a runic inscription carved by Vikings into the rock. However, even back then it was established that the so-called runes were too worn down and no longer legible, therefore their content seemed destined to remain a mystery. For hundreds of years, the Runamo runes were left ignored, but there was a renewed interest in them during the 18th and 19th centuries. Scholars wanted to inspect the carvings once again, hoping they might see something that their ancestors missed. One of these scholars was Finnur Magnusson, an Icelandic archaeologist who taught at the University of Copenhagen. Back then, he was considered one of the leading European experts on Old Norse literature and runes. Therefore, in 1834, he convinced the Royal Danish Academy of Sciences and Letters to fund a research expedition to study these runes. Afterwards, Magnusson made the boldest proclamation. He had deciphered the runes. He claimed they were a poem praising King Harald Wartooth for his bravery at the Battle of Bravalla. Magnusson's interpretation was accepted and heralded all throughout Europe as a triumph of antiquarianism and the restoration of a glorious part of history. A couple of years later, though, preeminent Swedish chemist Jons Jacob Berzelius decided to inspect the inscription for himself, and he arrived at a shocking conclusion. The carvings were not a rune at all. They were actually just natural cracks and fissures in the rock. Magnusson's reputation, well, it never recovered from the scandal. Number 9. The Holyoke Pendant. In 1889, an American archaeologist named Hilborn T. Cresson presented an interesting artifact. It was an ancient pendant made out of a piece of shell which featured an engraving of a mammoth. Considering that mammoths had been extinct in North America for over 10,000 years, it would have been a unique and priceless item. Immediately, there were suspicions cast upon the authenticity of the artifact. For starters, Cresson had claimed that he found the pendant 25 years earlier near the Delaware River. He couldn't really explain why he waited so long before coming forward with it other than claiming that he didn't realize its value, which for an archaeologist is a bit of a stretch. Then there was Cresson himself, who wasn't exactly what you might call a person of high moral fiber. He was fired from his position for stealing artifacts from a dig and selling them to private collectors. Eventually, the Holyoke Pendant was dismissed as a likely forgery, but this could not be conclusively proven in the 19th century, so instead the item was simply thrown in a drawer somewhere and forgotten about. Now, this should have been the end of the Holyoke Pendant, but it drew renewed interest during the 1970s and was even featured on the cover of the May 1976 issue of Science. For some reason, people started thinking that it could be genuine again. One article speculated that the artifact could be up to 40,000 years old. Again, science was not yet ready to disprove the notion, but it would be a decade later. In 1988, radiocarbon tests dated the shell to approximately 885 AD, making it only 1,100 years old. Number 8. The Golden Tiara of Cytofernes. The Louvre holds some of the greatest collections of artifacts ever assembled, but even they are prone to embarrassing gaffes. The most foolish one occurred over 100 years ago, and it's probably one they'd rather you forget. Fittingly, this blunder started on April Fool's Day, April the 1st, 1896, when the Louvre announced the addition of a spectacular artifact they had just purchased. They called it the Tiara of Cytofernes, and it was purported to be a gold sheet crown which once belonged to a Scythian king from the 3rd century BC. As one of the most successful museums in the world, the Louvre had an extensive staff of experts who examined the tiara and proclaimed it to be the real thing. The fact that the British Museum in London and the Imperial Court Museum in Vienna both turned down this opportunity to buy it did not raise any red flags for the Louvre, who paid 200,000 francs for the crown. As you might expect, the tiara was a fake. Almost immediately, outside experts raised suspicions. One of the first was a German professor named Adolf Furtwängler, but the Louvre doubled down on their position and even accused critics like Furtwängler of spite and xenophobia against the French. For 6 long years, the museum stubbornly refused to admit defeat. Eventually, word of the scandal reached Odessa. Specifically, it reached Israel Rokomovsky, the man who actually made the forgery. He came forward saying that he was commissioned to manufacture the item as a gift for an archaeologist friend and never knew it would be presented as genuine. Finally, the Louvre admitted their mistake. Number 7. The Calavera Skull. Josiah Whitney was one of the greatest American geologists in history. He taught geology at Harvard University and served as chief of the California Geological Survey. Mount Whitney, the tallest mountain in the contiguous United States, is named in his honor, as is Whitney Glacier. All of that being said, Whitney was not an anthropologist or an archaeologist. Therefore, when he came upon an ancient hominin skull, he probably should have asked for a more informed opinion. He didn't, though. When Whitney was given a skull which allegedly was discovered by miners under a layer of lava 130 feet below ground, he became convinced that it was genuine. Dubbed the Calavera Skull, Whitney first presented it to the world on July the 18th, 1866. He claimed that it was 1,000,000 years old, which at the time would have made it the oldest human remains ever uncovered. Obviously, there were doubts, both from experts and from the media, but Whitney also had his supporters. For whatever reason, it took almost 3 decades before an archaeologist managed to get a good look at the skull. It was William H. Holmes from the Smithsonian Institution who dismissed it as a hoax because the skull features were too modern. Subsequent investigations revealed that the skull was put in place by miners who wanted to play a joke on Whitney. The final nail in the coffin occurred in 1992 when the Calavera skull was carbon dated and shown to be only 1,000 years old. Number 6. Drake's Plate of Brass. Between 1577 and 1580, British explorer Sir Francis Drake performed the second circumnavigation of the globe. During his voyage, he landed in North America in what is now Point Reyes, California, and claimed that land for England. According to the journey of one of his sailors, Drake also left behind a plate of brass to mark the occasion, and ever since then, this long-lost artifact has been something of a holy grail for historians who focus on the early colonization of America. One of these scholars was Herbert Eugene Bolton, who spent most of his career teaching and researching Spanish-American history at Berkeley. He was not only convinced that Drake's plate existed, but in 1937, he actually thought that he'd found it. The artifact in question had been unearthed a few years prior. As soon as Bolton saw it, he became convinced that it was the genuine article and persuaded fellow members of the California Historical Society to donate $3,500 to purchase the plate and donate it to Berkeley's Bancroft Library. Right away, there was skepticism skepticism mostly caused by the language used on the plate's inscription, which detractors said was too modern. However, Bolton and his compatriots, they'd hear none of it. To their credit, they had the plate authenticated by an electrochemistry professor who concluded that it was genuine, so for the next 40 years, Drake's plate of brass was seen as one of California's most significant historical artifacts. Then, in the late 1970s, new tests showed that it was a modern fake. Even so, the mystery still remained as to who made it and why. It would be another 3 decades before other historians managed to piece together what had happened. As it turns out, the fake plate of brass was a practical joke at Bolton's expense that got way out of hand really fast. Bolton was a member of a historical fraternity called E Clampus Vetus, or ECV, as was a man named Ezra Dane, allegedly the architect behind the hoax. Dane and his accomplices even wrote the letters ECV on the back of the plate in fluorescent paints, but apparently nobody thought to check for that. Once Bolton went public with his findings, it was too late for them to simply admit their deed without damaging their reputations. Their story only started getting out decades later, after most of the conspirators had died. Number 5. The Persian Princess. In 2000, Pakistani authorities came into possession of a unique artifact that had been put on sale on the black market. This was a Persian mummy. Just after its recovery, Pakistani archaeologists held a press conference where they presented the thrilling find, claiming it was an Egyptian-style female mummy dated to approximately 600 BC, placed in a coffin with cuneiform writing and images of the Zoroastrian deity Ahura Mazda. To add to the excitement, there was speculation that the mummy was a daughter of King Xerxes I. The value and magnitude of the discovery was so grand that it immediately started an international argument between Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan over who the rightful owner of the mummy was. But then enough time passed that some actual examinations could be done to verify its authenticity. First, tests revealed that the wood from the coffin was only 250 years old, so just like that, the Persian princess was revealed to be fake. But in a disturbing twist, the mummy itself turned out to be much younger than that. In fact, it belonged to a woman in her early 20s who had been killed just a few years prior. Therefore, the recovery of an ancient mummified princess turned into an investigation of a modern murder victim. Number 4. Piltdown Man. At the start of the 20th century, anthropologists and archaeologists were eagerly searching for a missing link, a previously undiscovered species that would bridge the gap between ape and man. Understandably, the scientific world became extremely excited in 1912 when British amateur archaeologist Charles Dawson claimed to have found this link: skull fragments of an early human dubbed Piltdown Man. Dawson enlisted the help of a preeminent paleontologist named Arthur Smith Woodward, who helped reconstruct the skull. They then presented their findings to their peers at the Geological Society of London, proclaiming that the fossils belonged to a human ancestor from 500,000 years ago, which they named Eoanthropus dawsoni, or Dawson's Dawn Man. Over the following decades, Piltdown Man lost some of its luster because scientists kept discovering fossils from other ancient humans. However, it wasn't until 40 years later, in 1953, that Piltdown Man was actually proven to be a fake made by carefully combining bones from humans and apes. It was a severe black eye for the scientific world and still serves as a warning about the fallibility of archaeology even now, 100 years later. As to the culprit behind the hoax, their identity still remains a mystery, although recent research into the topic suggests that it was Charles Dawson himself who orchestrated the deception. Number 3. The Sarcophagus of Tarragona. This semi-obscure archaeological bunkum is somewhat unique, as it fooled people once, then was dismissed as a hoax, and decades later, it fooled them again. It started all the way back in 1850, when workers in Tarragona, Spain, uncovered a marble sarcophagus with unusual inscriptions on it that appeared to show a giant man breaking apart 2 boulders as many other people approached him from all directions. A local archaeologist named Bonventura Hernandez y Sanahuja claimed that it depicted the story of Hercules opening the Strait of Gibraltar. This would have been fine by itself, except that Sanahuja concluded that the procession of people on the inscription were coming from Egypt. He was, of course, of the opinion that around 3,600 years ago, the Egyptians overthrew the Hyksos people and pursued them all the way into Spain. Sanahuja believed that this Egyptian tomb found in Tarragona was evidence of this. Not a lot of other scholars agreed with this notion, most of them dismissing the sarcophagus as a hoax, although whether it was perpetrated by Sanahuja himself or somebody else has never been established. This should have been the end, were it not for a strange moment that occurred almost 60 years later, courtesy of American archaeologist Arthur Frothingham, co-founder of the American Journal of Archaeology. In a 1916 issue, he talked about Phoenician iconography and used a fragment from the images on the sarcophagus. He was seemingly unaware of its true origins, as he dubbed it the Phoenician tablet of Tarragona and presented it as genuine. It wasn't until 5 years later that a French historian named Pierre Paris spotted his gaffe and once again dismissed the sarcophagus as a parody of Egyptian art. Number 2. The Piltdown Bird. This is a reminder that archaeological mistakes done out of haste or inexperience are not a thing of the past. Back in 1999, the National Geographic Society made a bold proclamation about a newly discovered feathered species found in China. They had elusive access to this prehistoric fossil, and after weeks of tests, they named it Archaeoraptor lianingenesis, a supposed link between dinosaurs and birds. Presented in National Geographic, the senior editor wrote, "Its long arms and small body scream bird. Its long, stiff tail screams dinosaur." Just a few weeks later, the magazine had to publish an embarrassing retraction, admitting that the animal was a fake. One of the largest scientific organizations in the world had been duped by a few Chinese farmers who put together pieces from different animals. Retroactively, the creature became known as the Piltdown Bird, as the situation reminded everyone of the fossil forgery from a century before. Number 1. Nebraska Man. Finally, we take a look at a case similar to that of Piltdown Man, except this one took place in the United States of America. In 1917, a rancher from Nebraska named Harold Cook found an old tooth which appeared human. 5 years later, he sent it to Henry Fairfield Osborn, president of the American Museum of Natural History and one of the country's leading paleontologists. After examination, Osborn proclaimed it to be a hominin tooth which belonged to the newly named Hesperiopithecis haroldcooki, the first anthropoid ape discovered in North America. Because that name was a bit long-winded, the new species became known as Nebraska Man in 1922. Since it had been identified from a single tooth, there were doubts in the scientific community right from the outset. In just a few years, continued digs at the site found other parts of the skeleton and confirmed that the tooth did not, in fact, belong to any kind of hominin. It actually came from an extinct species of a pig-like mammal called a peccary. By 1927, the existence of Nebraska Man had officially been debunked. Unlike Piltdown Man, this was a case of genuine human error, not a hoax. Also, unlike Piltdown Man, Nebraska Man was only around for a few years and never fully convinced the scientific world of its authenticity. And yet, it did far more damage to its credibility thanks to the time and location of the discovery. Nebraska Man became a topic of conversation around the time of the Scopes trial, which brought evolution under fire in America. In fact, Osborn himself regularly engaged in debates defending evolution, including against William Jennings Bryan, the lawyer who led the prosecution in the Scopes trial. Nebraska Man being a mistake gave a lot of ammunition to creationists and others who rallied against evolution. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Do not forget to subscribe for brand new videos just like this every day of the week. For more from me, why not check out that other channel I mentioned called Geographics? That is linked to below. And thank you for watching. A superstition is essentially anything you believe with no actual good reason to believe it. It is the opposite of science and logic, and in fact, science and logic will tear it apart. So you ignore the science and logic because maybe one day you wore blue socks and got a raise at work, so now you believe wholeheartedly that your blue socks are lucky and they make you money. It's not true. Historically, whole cultures have come to adopt some of these superstitions as legit beliefs and fears based on coincidence, anecdotal evidence, and maybe just a fervent hope that the world has some more mystery in it than we can see. Here are some of the weirdest of the bunch. Number 10. Opposing mirrors will welcome the devil. Having a mirror facing another mirror is a cool effect, and the reason the Hall of Mirrors in a funhouse is a place called a funhouse to begin with. It messes with your head, creates an endless hallway of fun, and also provides an effect used in far too many horror and action movies to even begin to count. But apparently none of those were filmed in Mexico because you don't want to have one mirror facing another mirror there. According to Mexican superstition, when a mirror faces another mirror, you're inviting the devil in by creating a threshold of a doorway for him to enter your world. Maybe all of those horror movies with mirrors in them were onto something after all. They weren't. Number 9. Filipino pagpag. Pagpag is a fun word if you don't know what it means, but in practice, it's a little grim. From a Filipino superstition relating to funerals,
Oops, sorry.
This hat was sent to me by a viewer who said it was given to him by a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps. It's a lovely felt example of the type of hat that's called a campaign hat, which is described as a broad, flat-brimmed hat with a tall crown that has been pinched symmetrically on its four corners. And I'm very grateful that the viewer sent me this hat, not only because this hat itself has a really interesting history, and not only because the campaign hat as a design has an interesting history, but because campaign hats a very personal meaning to me. My father, George Henry Geiger, served in the U.S. Army as an artillery officer, but spent much of his life working in the United States Forest Service. Now, by the time my father became a forest ranger, the campaign hat was no longer a part of their uniform, and I don't recall him ever wearing a campaign hat. And yet I grew up seeing this hat everywhere, and it was because of this guy. Smokey Bear is an interesting story himself, and many don't realize that he was a product of war. The United States Forest Service got its start in 1876 with the creation of the Office of Special Agent in the Department of Agriculture to assess the state of the forests in the United States. In 1881, the office was expanded into the Division of Forestry, which later became the Bureau of Forestry and eventually the Forest Service. The purpose of the service is to manage federal lands, initially for the purpose of streamflow protection. Despite its name, the Forest Service manages federal grasslands as well as forests. My father served for years as the district ranger for a grassland with so few trees that when there was a fire, he could legitimately ask, "Which tree?" While the Forest Service was not created for the purpose of fighting forest fires, that is part of forest management, and members of the service certainly fought fires prior to the Second World War. Their service was particularly noted for fighting the Great Fire of 1910 that burned some 3 million acres. But prior to the war, firefighting and prevention were not urgent matters for the service, nor was there any national strategy for educating the public on forest fire prevention. The Second World War changed that in two important ways. First, significant numbers of the able-bodied men who normally fought fires went into the service, and now firefighting would mean diverting manpower resources from the war effort. And second, the Empire of Japan saw forest fires as a war strategy. That strategy included an attempt to start fires using a plane launched from a submarine, as well as using paper balloons carried by the jet stream called Fugo balloons that are the subject of another The History Guy episode. But suffice to say, during the war, the now reduced Forest Service saw an increased need to educate the public on preventing forest fires. The program started in 1942 and was called the Cooperative Forest Fire Prevention Program, or the CFFP, and the Forest Service had a great animated animal to headline the program. No, not Smokey Bear, but Bambi. Released in 1942, part of the climax of the animated film includes a forest fire started by a campfire, and Bambi seemed a perfect way to kick off the campaign. Disney allowed the Forest Service to use the characters from the movie in the campaign, but only loaned Bambi for a year, leaving the Forest Service in need of a new spokesanimal. In 1944, the service settled on using a black bear. The bear was named Smokey after a New York firefighter who had suffered burns during a rescue, and in his first poster, released in October 1944, Smokey was depicted wearing blue jeans and a campaign hat, and that outfit stuck. The slogan, "Only you can prevent forest fires," was not coined until 1947. Now, if you were under the impression that Smokey Bear was based on a real bear, that's understandable. There was a black bear found injured as a cub in the 1950 Capitan Gap fire in New Mexico. The cub was named Smokey and was eventually placed in the National Zoo. The Forest Service did use this real bear in its campaign. But the fictional Smokey Bear actually predated the real Smokey Bear, who was actually named after the Forest Service symbol. This is my great-uncle. We called him Uncle Pino. He happened to have been one of the firefighters on the Capitan Gap fire. When I was growing up, my house was full of pins and posters and notepads and pencils and comic books and anything that could have a picture of Smokey Bear on it, always wearing a hat very like this hat. Once a year, my dad would get the Region's Smokey Bear costume, which included a huge rubber Smokey Bear head that had a huge rubber campaign hat on top of it, and he would march in the 4th of July parade. Campaign hats are an important part of my childhood memories, and even more poignant now that my father is no longer with us. But that raises the question, why was Smokey Bear wearing that particular kind of hat? And that answer goes back as far as the 1840s. For much of the 19th century, the U.S. Army had a simple undress hat called a forage cap. We talked about these in another episode, but the key point here is that the various forage caps had relatively small brims or peaks, and out on the plains of the Wild West they were simply not sufficient to protect a soldier from the burning sun. Not only were uniform regulations relatively less strictly adhered to at the time, but they were even less so in the West, and as early as the 1840s, soldiers serving on the frontier started to adopt the larger brimmed sombrero worn by Mexican vaqueros. Slowly the hat, which had a high crown and a wide flat brim, was modified to be more practical, and based on the individual style of where soldiers chose to place creases in the crown, some started to look very like the modern campaign hat. Many of these were a distinctive hat made by the Stetson Company called the Boss of the Plains hat. Designed to be lightweight and waterproof, the hat was very common in the West, and its look really depended upon the style of the wearer, but dimpled on four sides with the brim kept flat, it was essentially a campaign hat. But the same hat could be creased in the middle and pinned up on one side like a slouch hat. An exaggerated version was worn in early Western movies and called the 10-gallon hat. These unofficial hats did not become official for the U.S. Army until 1872, when a black felt wide-brim hat was reserved for use while on campaign, and thus the name of the campaign hat. This hat, however, was not the same that we see today. In fact, it was designed to be able to fold under the arm and was rather shapeless. Some of these are worn with campaign cords, like popular seen on cavalry hats in John Wayne movies. The campaign hat changed over time, getting a smaller brim and changing from black to drab and getting vents in the sides. But even then it was more common to have a crease in the middle rather than the distinctive four dimples of the modern campaign hat. But notably, cavalry units started wearing and dimpling the hat in the four dimpled campaign style that was called a Montana peak by at least the middle 1880s. Notable among these was the famed 9th and 10th Cavalry, formed in September 1886. The 10th were the first all-black regiment of the U.S. Army formed in peacetime. There had been black regiments during the Civil War. The 10th served in the West in the Indian Wars and were given the name Buffalo Soldiers by the Native Americans they fought, and the term came to be applied to 4 U.S. black regiments formed during the period, the 9th and 10th Cavalry and the 24th and 25th Infantry. The Buffalo Soldiers fought with distinction in the Indian Wars, with 19 officers and men of the 4 regiments earning Medals of Honor between 1885 and 1898. The 10th also fought in the Spanish-American War in the 1st Division of the 1st Brigade, which also included the 1st United States Volunteer Cavalry, also known as the Rough Riders, some of whom also dimpled their hats in the campaign hat style. Starting in August 1886, members of the U.S. Army were deployed in national parks to discourage poachers, defend the forests, and stop rampant stagecoach robbery. These included Buffalo Soldiers of the 9th Cavalry and 24th Infantry, who served in Yosemite, Sequoia, and Kings Canyon National Parks between 1899 and 1904. In 1911, the Department of the Interior started hiring civilian scouts and established a uniform for them that retained the flat hat with the Montana peak that had been worn by the soldiers that had previously guarded the national parks. When the United States National Park Service was established in 1916, the hat continued with the uniform and has been retained in the National Park Service dress uniform to this day. The hat is also worn by some other state park services, as well as rangers with the Army Corps of Engineers. Which is yet another reason that I'm attached to the campaign hat. I worked for the National Park Service seasonally for 5 summers in the 1980s while attending college. Being summer seasonal, I wore the straw version. In 1896, gold was discovered in the Klondike region of the Yukon in northwest Canada. Tens of thousands of prospectors, many of them Americans, trekked to Canada in hope of striking it rich. Trying to manage the onrush and the resulting lawlessness, Canada deployed the Northwest Mounted Police, a force that had been created in 1873 to maintain order in the Northwest Territories. The official uniform of the Northwest Mounted Police included either a brimless pillbox hat or a white pith helmet, neither of which was particularly practical in the Klondike. The Northwest Police therefore started wearing the Stetson Boss of the Plains hat. It's not clear if this was just the most practical hat or if the NWMP were inspired by the many American prospectors who wore the hat, but the Northwest Mounted Police in the Klondike region began wearing the hat with 4 dimples. Except that while the American soldiers generally wore the hat with the dimples offset so that there was a front to hold a badge, the Northwest Mounted Police wore the hat with a dimple facing the front. It may be apocryphal, but the use of the Stetson has been largely attributed to Samuel Benfield Steele, who served with the Northwest Mounted Police in the Klondike and led the force there starting in 1898. Being more practical than the uniform pith helmet, the campaign hat came to be adopted by most of the Northwest Mounted Police. In 1920, the Northwest Mounted Police became the Royal Northwest Mounted Police, and the hat, pinched symmetrically at the four corners, became official. It was, of course, retained when, in 1920, they became the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the Mounties still wear famously the hat with their dress uniform today. As former members of the Northwest Mounted Police, including Sam Steele, made up much of the second contingent of Canadian volunteers to go fight in the Second Boer War in South Africa in 1900, Canadian units, with the exception of the very first contingent of the Service Battalion of the Royal Canadian Regiment, wore the campaign hat. The style with the four dimples apparently impressed New Zealand regiments during the Boer War, some of whom adopted the style instead of the one-side pinned-up slouch hat. New Zealanders colloquially called the style the lemon squeezer. The hat was officially adopted by some New Zealand regiments as early as 1911, but at the outset of the Great War was not officially part of the uniform. In 1916, after the Gallipoli campaign, the Territorial Force revised its uniform, and the lemon squeezer, although officially called the felt hat with a peaked crown, was made an official part of the uniform, partly because some seemed to think the design looked more military than a slouched hat. The hat distinguished the New Zealand soldiers from Australian and other Commonwealth soldiers. The style was retained by the New Zealand Army through the Second World War, was discontinued in 1960, was reintroduced for ceremonial dress in 1977, and today is still used by honor guards on special formal occasions. But the hat may have been adopted in New Zealand via another route. Frederick Russell Burnham was the son of a missionary, born on a Sioux Indian reservation in Minnesota in 1861. He learned the profession of scouting from the Sioux as a youth and from frontiersmen in the American West. He served as an Indian scout during the Apache Wars, where he picked up the campaign hat from U.S. cavalry, including buffalo soldiers. He fought in the range feud called the Pleasant Valley War, was a prize fighter in Tombstone, Arizona, but as the American West seemed settled and there was no longer a need for scouts, in 1893 he packed off with his wife and son to South Africa. In South Africa, he became Chief of Scouts for the British South Africa Company, fighting in the First and Second Matabele Wars in the 1890s. There he met an English officer and fellow scout named Robert Baden-Powell. They became friends, and Baden-Powell both learned quite a lot of the woodcraft that Burnham had learned from his youth with the Sioux, and started wearing the Stetson hat in the four-dimple campaign style that Burnham wore. Baden-Powell would eventually become so associated with the hat that it is often called a Baden-Powell hat. It was while the two worked as scouts during the Matabele War that they discussed the concept of creating a broad training program in woodcraft for young men. After both men served during the Second Anglo-Boer War, they took the idea and the hat and started the worldwide scouting movement. Baden-Powell described the hat as good protection from sun and rain. That was part of both the early Boy and Girl Scout uniforms, and although largely replaced by simpler and cheaper hats such as berets and ball caps, is still a uniform option for the Boy Scouts of America. Scouts were well established in New Zealand in 1916 when the country was designing its new uniform, and the hat was, in the discussion, often called a Baden-Powell hat. So it's unclear if the New Zealand archetypal campaign hat was inspired by Sam Steele's Boer War Canadians or Robert Baden-Powell's Boy Scouts. And so I have another affinity for the campaign hat, having been a Boy Scout in the 1970s when Scout leaders still pretty commonly were seen wearing the Baden-Powell hat. The U.S. Army did not make official the campaign hat be worn with the Montana Peak until the pattern 1911 service hat. The hat was worn by Army units during the 1916-17 punitive expedition against Pancho Villa and was worn by both Marines and soldiers during the series of interventions in Central America between 1898 and 1934 called the Banana Wars. The hat was a general issue to troops during the First World War. These were worn by Company H of the 5th Missouri Infantry in 1917.